Team, we are here to talk about Opus, which is the new A24 horror thriller that I managed to get to a preview screening yesterday. Media and influencers preview screening. It was at the View West End, which is in Leicester Square, and it was in Screen 7, and I sat in seat C16. Opus, new A24 film. This is in the run of A24 films that are kind of like they've really cornered this niche of like mind-bending, quirky horror thrillers. You know, we've all been on for the ride, and by we've all, I mean movie nerds. You know, we've really grown with this mystique of A24, and like it really feels like the next A24 film, you got to go see it because it's almost a meme now of like, God, they're just gonna make something that's super fucking cool that you want to talk about with all your movie nerd mates. Anyway, this is not that. So this I would regard as one of the biggest missteps of A24 to date, maybe the biggest, and we'll come on to that in a second. So I think the first problem for me is that this is another film that is a horror or thriller inflected movie based around wealth. Specifically, normal person invited to an exquisite, affluent location, surroundings, situation, whatever, and then those surroundings start to reveal themselves to be seedy, grimy, and sordid under the surface. Maybe it's not quite all what we seem, and then in that we get a comment on XYZ about wealth, fame, whatever. This is in the same vein as Blink Twice, the Zoe Kravitz film. It's in the same vein as The Menu. We've also seen this in kind of not horror, but like dramas such as Saltburn, Triangle of Sadness. And I talked with my friend from Pulp Kitchen, George. He was at the same screen. And I talked with him about this before the film started. I says, this is more common now, right? This didn't used to be a really common premise for horror thrillers. And he was like, no, it is more common now. I don't think it used to be the major trope for horror films. I think horror films, if anything, used to be the opposite. Like it used to just be about regular everyday folk going through crazy situations, but in regular everyday surroundings. So like going back to the Halloween days. These types of films, they are kind of teetering on the edge of these genres. And part of my problem is that they're never really diving into one or the other. And I think it's the influence of Jordan Peele who does this so well. You know, in Get Out, he set the template for like a thinky, fun horror that was able to tread comedy and violence at the same time. And I think that essentially like every filmmaker has been trying to grasp that ever since. And you know, even in my in my series on this channel, Let's Write a Screenplay, we're already kind of like finding ourselves dragged down the similar paths, you know, of like, oh, how can we make this quirky and different? And it's all the same template of like getting an invite somewhere and then it all goes to shit. And I've already voice noted my mate Ian, who's doing Let's Write a Screenplay with me, to say we need to change this because it's just so done now. It's so done. That being said, I'm not against a film being good in that in that context. And this wasn't. So one thing that really gets to me about this type of genre is when the horror is not earned. It's not earned, right? So I won't actually give the game away too much in this review, but there is a point where, you know, obviously we know there's going to be some people are going to get knocked off in this film, right? And that point comes really early and really violently. And I've never actually experienced so clearly a sense of like, oh wow, this horror's really jumped the shark like too soon. You know, when you're watching a haunted house horror and you're like, oh, there's a little knock on the wall and then you hear a little scratch and then you see a flash of the ghost and then suddenly, by the end, it's like all crazy. And like, sometimes those stages can feel, again, very well trodden and very laborious. But actually seeing it like this, where like the horror and the gruesomeness came in completely out of left field very early on in the film and completely out of step with the tone of the film at that point, I was like, oh, it really made me realize that those steps are important because it just felt so fucking wrong. And then from that point, you could sense in the room that the audience was out of step with the film, and the film was out of step with itself. There's also another issue here, which is that I think that this is not just a story that doesn't work, that feels done to death and blah, blah, blah. I think this is a film that is in some respects actually incompetently made. So again, without going into too much detail, there are slices of evidence of like reshoots, ADR, story changes, tag-ons, really quite harsh edits, and actually just incompetence from a crew point of view in terms of like lighting and cinematography at points. So there's certain points where it's quite hard to discern what action is going on. There's certain points where it feels like we're on, say it's a dirty two-shot, we're on, and this is the back of someone's head and they're talking to me. We're on the back of their head for such a long time that I'm thinking, oh, they ADR'd this. Like, this person was saying something else and they've had to keep it on this shot so that they can ADR, like add after another line of dialogue. And that happened quite a lot. And so all this film, I'm thinking, oh, seems like there's quite a lot of dialogue they've changed. I wonder if they had problems with the story here. And then I start noticing almost like chunks of the film either missing or changed. I can't put my finger on what it is. Where like the story jumps, the plot, I should say, jumps quite dramatically. There's quite big time shifts. And I'm like, I actually don't know how this character got here, physically, how they got here. I don't mean in terms of like across time and space. I mean like in terms of the steps of the film, like this isn't where we left this character and then suddenly they're here. I won't describe what it is, but there's an ending that almost certainly was shot after the fact, written after the fact, or added, tagged on at the end, once they realised that this thing didn't really come together. And they were trying to bring together the themes in that reshot ending, and it didn't work. And so, all in all, this is an ill-judged, ill-paced, borderline incompetent horror thriller about a well-trodden theme. And for that reason, it's a real failure. And it's, like I said at the start, one of the major missteps that I can remember of A24. And I was just talking to my friend about this theory that I've got in my head. Not a theory so much as a prediction. If you think about A24 for the last 5-10 years, to movie nerds, it's almost been like the first 5-10 years of Pixar. You know, it's been Toy Story 1, 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, maybe going up to The Incredibles, where everyone, parents and kids alike, were just like, Pixar's lights out. You gotta see the next Pixar film. Up until the point that they started sequelizing things. And so it was like the Cars sequels, they did Incredibles 2, and that kind of era. Inside Out was still brilliant, Ratatouille was still brilliant, WALL-E brilliant, but there was a feeling that, okay, these films aren't essential anymore. You can skip a few ones. And same with Marvel, same with the MCU. Like how there is this kind of peak of movie lore, cultural lore about a production company or like even a genre or like a movement. And you feel that crest and then the come down. And this, to me, felt so clearly like the come down from A24. It's felt like up until this point, I feel like the movie community has almost welcomed this like burgeoning indie-focused studio that is making really interesting films and like mid-level budget films, and that's really exciting. And they're alongside Neon and Blumhouse. But this is the point. This is like Cars 2. Like this is. I can't think of the other shit Pixar's off the top of my head at this point, but this is like the point where it's like, oh, A24 is losing its magic. And over the next 5-10 years, I can really see it being like Pixar now. You know, I don't mind these latter Pixar films, you know, like Soul and Coco. They're actually really good, but they don't feel essential anymore. And again, the only reason I'm aligning these two, because they're entirely different films that are being made, is because I just think that's where we're going to end up. We're going to end up looking back and being like, wow, that was such a golden era of indie filmmaking. A24 alongside Blumhouse with Get Out and whatnot, and alongside Neon with fucking Anora winning Best Picture and whatnot. And I think Parasite was Neon as well. And we're going to look back and be like, that really was an era. And this feels like the beginning of the end of that era, because it feels like, it doesn't feel like an A24 film. It feels like a pale imitation, bad parody of a caricature of an A24 film. It feels like someone else trying to do A24, but it's just bad. And I think the one thing, let's say A24 was for the movie nerds, the one thing that turns movie nerds off is not originality, and it's not taking big swings. It's something being badly thought out. I think people can accept something being like adventurous, but maybe misjudged. I think in this case, it's like not, it hasn't been realized correctly, like on screen. It's been actually badly done. And that's a different thing with A24, because I'm not saying every single film they've made has been fucking perfect, far from it. But they've all been like worthy, valuable. You can understand why they were commissioned. And this just feels like not a piss take. It feels like derivative of their own output. And that for that reason, they've jumped the shark. I'm not saying they can't make a good film ever again. I know they will. I'm sure they will. They'll be in production right now. But as an overarching point, I think that's where this era is going. And this felt like a really emblematic of that. Emblematic? How did you make up a word? Speaking of which, like I say, I have messaged my mate Ian about Let's Write a Screenplay, the series I'm doing on this channel, which you should be watching, where we're attempting to write a horror thriller screenplay. And I voice noted him this morning saying, okay, first of all, we're not going to make this about wealth in any way. And I'm going to try and actually take away the aspects of like getting an invite somewhere and it all turns out to be, because we were previously going to do that. We were going to get an invite to a social media party, and I just think it's done. And I was falling foul of it. And I knew it because I mentioned it on a couple of podcasts, but I still was going ahead with it. Like, this is just the trend right now, and it is done. It is done. So anyway, go give Let's Write a Screenplay a try if you haven't watched it. That we've done 11 episodes, and we're going to keep going as long as it takes to write a screenplay that we can sell to A24, Blumhouse, Neon, and hopefully get made. And you can come along for that journey, and you can suggest lines, suggest character changes, plot changes, and you can join us in making it a crowdsourced movie script. And I'm really excited about it, so get on board with that. And follow me on Letterboxd, which is the same username essentially, at Fred Asquith. So yeah, Opus, like a 1 out of 5, honestly. I don't know. You'll see on my Letterboxd review what I eventually give it, but yeah, maybe down there. All right, thanks guys.